It started off with conditions for normalized relations after this country managed to obliterate the force of darkness from its midst, thanks to its people and those safeguarding its existence. And shortly after, countries started to realize that the new Egypt is a force of stability and opportunity. Nowadays, observers and decision makers around the world are reconsidering how to approach what many analysts, international organizations, and economic power hubs call the great strides, with expectations that the Egyptian economy becomes among the world's 10 largest economies by 2035. Some are calling it success, and others go to the extent of naming it a miracle. Yet, when one looks at this country's history and heritage, a certain conclusion can be made. Wonders are part of its thousands of years of civilization. Good evening. You're watching the Business Insider here on Nile TV International. I'm Ayman Salah. Our weekly program tackles events affecting economies and business, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back to the Business Insider, and let's start with our news items for the day. The first news item is that Egypt and the US announced the launch of a high-level joint economic commission. They also announced the formation of a joint US-Egypt climate working group, plans for a green economy trade mission, and a new USAID trade reform program. Both countries wrapped up 2 days of strategic talks in Washington on Tuesday, with the Foreign Ministry and the State Department issuing a joint statement in which they reaffirmed the importance of the US-Egypt strategic partnership and identified areas in which to deepen bilateral and regional cooperation. The two delegations reaffirmed their shared commitment to broaden and deepen bilateral economic and commercial cooperation and to cooperate closely on climate issues. They shared ideas on increasing investment in their respective economies, providing more opportunities and combating the climate crisis. The US has welcomed Egypt's nomination to host the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and provide leadership as the incoming COP27 presidency in advancing global climate ambitions, and also commended its progress in developing green energy. Second news item for today: inflation unexpectedly eased last month. According to CapMass, annual urban inflation slid in October to 6.3% from its 20-month high of 6.6% in September. This comes in the backdrop of an ease in the rate of inflation in food and beverage prices and also education. In its figures released today, the decrease went against analysts' expectations of inflation continuing its upward trend through the fourth quarter of the year, on the back of the recent rise in fuel prices and a 28% rise in factories' gas bills, compounded by a surge in global commodity prices. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Business Insider. Tonight, I have the pleasure to host Dr. Ibrahim, Mostafa, Senior Economic Advisor. A pleasure to have you on the show here
My
tonight.
pleasure mine. Thank you for introducing me to this very distinguished program.
Thank you very much. Well, tonight's topic is the outlook into the Egyptian-US strategic dialogue and the latest export results as well. We're going to delve into the prospects of economic cooperation after a 6-year suspension of the strategic dialogue, and the announcement of the high-level joint economic commission and the formation of a joint US-Egypt climate working group and plans for a green economy trade mission, and the new US trade reform program that was agreed upon at the end of the strategic dialogue that took place in Washington over the past 2 days. Let's watch this report and then return to start our discussion.
The first half of 2021 saw a rise in total Egyptian exports, with the non-petroleum exports reaching about $15.4 billion compared to $12.5 billion during the same period of the previous year, and that's an increase of 23%. This is compared to non-petroleum imports of around $36.5 billion during the period from January to June 2021. Egyptian exports to the EU reached $4.8 billion. The Arab countries reached $4.7 billion, the US around $1.1 billion, African countries at $843 million, while those to China reached $365 million US. By sector, building materials and mineral industries topped the list with a value close to $3 billion. The chemical and fertilizer exports came in second with 2.9, while the food industry came third with $2 billion. The agricultural sector came fourth with a value of nearly 1.7, electronic and engineering products at the near 1.5, ready-made garments exports have reached about $916 million, and the spinning and textiles recorded $432 million. Printing, packaging and paper, along with the medical industry, upholstery, handmade exports, furniture products, leather and leather products followed in the hundreds of millions. The biggest market for Egyptian exports was the US, which imports over $1 billion of goods. That falls in line with the priority issues discussed in the Egyptian-US Strategic Dialogue, which closed its session on Tuesday. The latter's investment in Egypt go back decades and continue to the benefit of both countries. Egypt is also the largest export market for American goods in Africa. A new joint economic commission has been launched as an outcome of the meeting, and preparations are on the way to mark the centennial of relations in 2022.
Welcome back to the Business Insider. I have the pleasure to host Dr. Ibrahim Mostafa, Senior Economic Advisor. Once again, a pleasure to have you on the show here tonight. Let's start with the latest reports that showed big progress in terms of Egyptian non-oil exports. Yeah. Let's start with those results. What's your reading into those numbers?
They're just, for the first 9 months, this is the first time, to see an increase by 10% compared to the same period last year. The Egyptian exports is progressing very well during the last 9 months. Targeting several markets. The U.S. markets has become again among the top destinations of the Egyptian exports. It was in the fourth position last year during the pandemic, and this year came again to the top. Last year, according to the pandemic, countries like the Arab countries, KSA and UAE,
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates,
the first two positions. In last year, this year, became in the third and the fourth positions. The US market again came to the first position this year. Most of the produce, in the top list of the Egyptian exports, and they become for the building materials and minerals, the chemicals and the fertilizers. The third position is for the engineering products. The fourth one for the textiles and apparel. It's very important. Signals that to see this progress in the total Egyptian exports. See that the non-oil exports have been increasing very well this year. We are expecting, to see this kind of increase at the end of the year, focusing on the same products that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Yep. This is very important because the government has been working on supporting the private sector who are producing and exporting to the international market, whether to the European market, US markets, and other regional markets around you, benefiting from the trade agreements that Egypt has got for the last many years. Starting from last decade till this year, the EU partnership and the QIZ with the US market, as well as the regional markets, the COMESA and the GAFTA agreement.
Right. All right. Now, the Egyptian-American Strategic Dialogue wrapped up its sessions on Tuesday, and the economic file was high on the agenda. What would you say could have been priority issues?
No, just, the relations between, the U.S. and Egypt has been very strong for the last, for many decades. It's based on the mutual and maximizing the mutual interests for both countries, as well as the win-win situation. Regarding whether on the trade side or the investment side, we see many companies working in the Egyptian market. This is for the sake of both countries. This will benefiting Egypt from one side, as well as benefiting the American side. We have many companies in several sectors. In the oil sector, oil and gas sector, like Chevron, ExxonMobil, and other companies, as well as in the food sector, as well as in the industry, pharma sector. We have many companies working in the Egyptian market. The total investment during 1994 till the end of 2020, the American investments into the Egyptian market has represented $17 billion, which is very good figure. When we figure, as well as the U.S. is considered the fourth among the top investors in Egypt. Egypt is considered the second largest recipient of the U.S. investments in the African continent after Nigeria, and the fourth positions after Saudi Arabia and Qatar, as well as the United Arab Emirates. Which means that this kind of relations between both countries is very strong. It's based on the sake for both countries to maximize the mutual interest upon the win-win situation, as I mentioned.
You heard that a high-level joint economic commission was announced, along with the formation of the joint U.S.-Egypt climate working group, and plans for a green economy trade mission and a new U.S.-aid trade reform program. How have those been brought to the forefront?
Yes, this came after Glasgow summit this year, few days ago. They highlighted the issue of climate change in that summit, and this when they come to the
strategic dialogue.
Yeah, the strategic dialogue. It's normal to have this issue again to raise again during the summit, because Egypt is very interested about the climate change issues, because it's in the top topics of the global agenda all over the last years. In addition to that, maximizing the economic relations between both countries. Regarding increasing investments in Egypt, as well as using Egypt as a hub to penetrate to the African market. All these topics are very important to be discussed. This commission, I think, will be a good platform to maximize the mutual interest between both countries, as well as to represent a kind of very effective tool as a dialogue between both countries. And the crucial topics, as I mentioned, and you mentioned in your report, I think positive things will appear during the coming months. Regarding the results of this commission.
Where would you say is our edge in terms of increasing non-oil exports to the U.S. and balancing trade between the two countries?
Yes. Since 2005, Egypt has benefiting from the QIZ agreement. It's one of the trade systems that has been applied.
The qualified industrial zones.
Yeah, in addition to the generalized system of preferences between both countries. These systems allow the Egyptian produce to penetrate to the U.S. markets upon these agreements. The QIZ is very important because it kept the exports to the U.S. market relatively stable. Although that we have challenged, we have many challenges that came from the COVID-19 last year. Yes, it kept the exports to the U.S. market around $1 billion US, which is very important to keep this figure. This year decreased a bit because of the challenge that we faced during the last year, but it doesn't mean that we are not on the right track. Yes, we are on the right track. We should increase this. We should use these agreements to maximize our exports to the U.S. markets out of the non-oil products.
Okay, out of the non-oil. Now, if you go into the oil and gas, the U.S. is a major investor in the oil and gas sector in Egypt. Do you expect more investments in the renewable energy field? on the part of U.S.
According
companies?
what has been discussed in the climate change summit, there is very strong call to all countries to adopt the renewable energy in the future. And the call is, all the message has been sent to all countries, whether in the Middle East or in the Asian countries, to start to replace, the old energy,
fossil fuel,
to use this kind of new technology, new technology in the renewable energy. Now Egypt has been, working on this, for the last 10 years, like what we have in Benban, the biggest, solar plant in Egypt.
In Africa.
Yeah, this, it's in Aswan. The fund has been raised to this project has become from several countries, among which the international institutions as well as the U.S. Government. In this regard, I should highlight, something very important regarding the aid is coming from the U.S. It's very important to mention that we have received from 1978 around 30 billion US dollars as economic aid to the Egyptian government. We used it very much to upon what we called as the first win-win situation, for the sake of both countries. And using this aid figure has been used very well, very efficient in several things, like to improve the life of the Egyptian, the Upper Egypt, under the umbrella of decent life for Egyptians, Haya Karima. It's one of the umbrella, one of the tools that we used to be invested very well in several projects, mainly in the utilities and infrastructure. This has a very good impact on the ground, and this as well as has been highlighted by the American entities, the U.S. entities in Egypt, whether the embassy and the U.S. headquarters, that these aids are very important to both countries as well.
So to conclude this topic, how would you assess the outcome, the economic outcome of the Egyptian-U.S. strategic dialogue after a 6-year suspension?
I see it's very good progress in the relations between countries. This will enhance, the future, relations between both countries in several topics. Increasing the investments the investments of the U.S. and the Egyptian market, as well as facilitating, the trade issues that have been raised during the last few years, as well as after what happened during the pandemic by closing the markets. Egypt kept partially, open to all markets, which benefit Egypt to maximize some of its produce to the international markets, like the food and agricultural crops. In this regard, I see this commission being held in this time is very important. This to emphasize that this kind of relations between both countries is very strong, and it depends on, as I said, maximizing both countries' interests, whether in the region and all around all the topics raised in the global scope.
And the opportunities that are being presented in the Egyptian economy currently with the major mega projects that are taking place, the new Suez Canal industrial zone, the work on the road network, the railroad networks, and the renewable energy. You have major projects in many sectors. Don't those represent opportunities for economies around the world?
Yes, as you said, that when you improve the infrastructure, and the roads, the rails and the ports and the tunnels and bridges, all these things are very important. We call them enablers to the investment climate, as well as this. When any investor is looking for many factors to take the decision to invest in any country. The first thing, as I mentioned before, in previous interviews with you, the political and the civil stability, and then we have this, very strong on the ground. In addition to that, the macro picture that has been improved very well upon the international institutions certificates that came to the Egyptian eye. And the third thing, and that the effort that the government has been working on improving the infrastructure by having these work projects in the roads and the other areas. these projects are considered as, like, as you said, enablers and in the same time investment opportunities. Why? Because we are bringing our companies from outside to help us in increasing the pace of performing these projects. Yes, in this one, we are getting these companies with their know-how to help us. To make the achievement that we need to achieve within the coming years to finalize all these projects.
As investment opportunities for those companies.
For them, it's a kind of that bring as well as bring this investment in the Egyptian market and to create more jobs and help the pace of economic development in all levels.
All right. How has the global pandemic opened up new export opportunities for this country?
As I mentioned to you, a few minutes ago, some countries, appeared to be in the top list of as export destination of the Egyptian produce. As I said, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates last year became the top countries importing from the Egyptian market because they were in that time locking down their economies because of the pandemic procedures and all these stuff, as well as other countries. Not only these countries, the European countries as well. All of them were closing their economies, fully closing their economies. And at that time, Egypt was, still was balancing between both, the partial lockdown and continuing producing on the other side to make all produce available to the local market as well as the international markets from that time. That's why, the food and the agriculture crops increased last year, to these countries.
The exports.
Yeah, for the export sides. And this opened, what we call when you have a crisis, you always find opportunities, whether on the investment side or the trade side.
Right. All right. How can we sustain this momentum, taking into consideration the mega projects that you mentioned and that are on or are underway?
You are now building a new republic, what you call the new Republic of Egypt. You are branding Egypt now, building a new concept of cities, smart cities, big cities, infrastructure everywhere. You need to make Egypt different from the past. For the new admin capital, now you are building on a new smart city with different concept, with different brand, with different vision. This didn't come from from nothing. This is upon a very good vision for the future. All these projects has been planned very well during the last 7 years. They didn't come from nonsense. You really were planned very well. We know that these projects came to the ground, and having this kind of achievement and the percentage of achievement, which I see like a miracle that happened during the last 6 years. Solving the problem of many things. Regarding
electricity, for example,
slums, electricity. We were suffering from the shortage. After 2011, if you remember, that we solved it by targeting certain companies like Siemens and to come and to invest in this area to meet the shortage that we had in that time. In addition to that, the government has expanded its investment in this sector and the renewable energy as well. That said, we have a surplus on this side, and we started to think about re-exporting the energy to other countries around the region. This kind we can fostering our relations with our neighbors from one side and other countries in the region. This will sustain our position as a very strong country in the region, a superpower, as a hub to neighboring markets around, whether in Africa or in the Arab region.
What about incentivizing the private sector?
This is very important. According to the investment law, you have some incentive sites. But if you want to target, certain companies around the world and to bring them to work in Egypt, you should give more incentives, because they are thinking about why Egypt, not other countries.
So you have a competition.
Yes. When you target Siemens, you give them some incentives to come and invest in the energy sector, because you were in need to solve this problem. If you want now to enhance, the port side. The port side, like East Port side. Let's target one of the entities like an entity. I will target this entity to come and invest in this area, to operate this port. When I target this company, I might give them, a kind of free, without cost.
Grace period.
But I'm targeting the other companies working in the supply chain under this entity. Why? It's very easy to bring the whole supply chain to the country when you bring this, core entity or core company working in this field, like the logistics whole side.
So basically, look at your competition and offer a competitive edge for companies to invest
like
here.
in Egypt, to invest. Sometimes I can be a partner with them to facilitate all things. I will give you an example that one of the companies working in Brazilian companies thought about investing in the region, and they met 4 countries. One of the countries gave them, check. The amount was
blank
empty.
check.
Blank check. And please come and invest, and they will be your partner in putting you in the right position in this area. How you should play, and when you target companies, working in certain sectors or certain countries around the world, you start with filter, the companies under the sectors. You start to put a short list in each sector. Then you go to target these companies upon your need. This is how to prioritize your needs. I need this sector, subsector, so I need to target these companies. Then I will go to target these companies and follow up on that, like what happened in the energy sector.
Provide a competitive edge.
Yep.
All right, you talked about international investors.
Yeah.
What about incentivizing local investors?
And for the local investors, it's very important to take care of their problems. Very important, because they are considered like the mirror to the international investors. When any investor wants to ask about the Egyptian market, they start to look the investor working in this sector. Let's say that I'm working in the manufacturing sector in a certain area. I go to the investor working in this sector and start to ask about the market. The other party I'm asking about the market, I go to the law firm and the audit firm, because they are the thermometers of the market from the other side, from the legal point of view and the accounting point of view. Does it work to come and invest in Egypt? So when you keep this kind of momentum, solving the problem of the existing companies working in Egypt, mainly, the Egyptian and the Egyptian investors, it's very important to make them satisfied about the investment climate in Egypt and the bureaucracy. That's why the Egyptian government now is taking care of moving to the digital system, digitalizing the economy, which is very important. This will decrease, the interaction between the employee and, the client.
So basically, you should start by incentivizing local investments, local producers, as a gateway to attract international investors.
You should work on both, parallelly. On this side, you should work on having the local investors, working in the Egyptian market, satisfied. Because when you ask them, they will deliver a positive message about the market.
All right.
The other side, you target the other companies in the way that I mentioned before.
I understand that's an off-topic.
Yeah.
But I understand that you just completed a PhD in political economy. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much.
What was the topic about?
It was about I was studying, the impact of political factors on combating, economic corruptions. How these, I mentioned, I focused on 4 factors: the rule of law and conflict of interest, as well as the freedom of media, and as well as if there is something regarding regulating, the civil society as well, making them very influential in the market, in addition to issuing, the law of getting information and data from, in a formal way. How these factors, affecting whether this, the policy of combating corruption, economic corruption, whether in Egypt and other countries compared in this study. I focused on, the successful models as well as the models that failed to make it happen. Why? Because not to do the same thing that these failed companies, failed states that made in applying such policies, and in addition to that, how to gain, I mean, the right procedures and policies that have been adopted by other successful countries. It was, I mean, it wasn't an easy topic because you should.
But let me ask you, how is corruption affecting economic development in the case studies that you studied?
That's why. The cost, I mean, of corruption, I mean, and the investment climate in some, I mean, one of the studies said that it's more than 50%, I mean, in the African countries, which is a very, I mean, very high cost when you, it's not, I mean, registered in the formal records, and that's this can't be calculated in the, I mean, for the companies working under the corporate governance and all these things, they can't put these, I mean, they can't put this cost under this, I mean, formal calculations. That's why it's very high in the market, I mean, in the African countries. Really, Egypt, I mean, did well in the last 5 years around this because Egypt launched, I mean, the national strategy for combating corruption. First phase and the second phase started. The second phase started in 2019 and will end by 2022. In addition to that, they established the National Institute for Sustainable Development and Governance. We have other institutions working on this, like the Center for Managers that under EFSA. All these institutions are working in addition to other regulatory bodies that are working on combating corruption in Egypt. Really, according to the study that I made, I tailored on this and got the PhD upon the study. The political was very crucial factor in making all these policies successful in the countries that I studied.
The political will.
Yeah, this is very important. And none of the countries that I surveyed and studied in the study got, I mean, the full mark. The highest one got 88%, which means that it's a continuous process. Whatever you are,
even developed countries,
even, I mean, the top-ranked countries, the top rank got 88% from 100. I mean that every country is trying to eliminate the corruption to the minimum. That's why countries are varying from, I mean, 0 to top to 100 according to their ranking upon the measures that have been the methodology is being applied by the international reports in this regard.
There is a cost to combating corruption.
I mean, costs by having, yes, you have a cost. I mean, you should, every country allocated, I mean, a very certain amount in the budget that to make all the institutions work in an effective way. In addition to that, the reforms have been made to these entities and making them independent and very influential and efficient in applying the procedures and the policy that.
How can this cost? Because there's a cost of corruption,
yeah,
and which is a very high cost, as you mentioned. In Africa, it's up to 50%. And you're asking also, or we're seeking that the businesses combat corruption. Yet businesses bear a cost to combat corruption.
Yeah.
How can you mitigate this cost? Is it a joint effort? Because you mentioned political will, and the political here in Egypt, for example, there is a political will,
yeah, and
there are steps that have been taken. But how can you mitigate the cost on the businesses to combat corruption?
I mean, it's not only it's not the government efforts. I mean, it's different parties' efforts in this regard.
Right.
It's coming from the government
joint
side
effort
to make the regulatory bodies working very well, efficient and automated from one side, in addition to the political. From the other side, I mean...
and to empower them as well.
Yeah. On the other side, when you apply the automation side, I mean, the business side will interact with the government side with an out of direct, I mean, tools. This, I mean, will eliminate, I mean, the challenge of corruption from one side. The other side, when you oblige all companies moving to applying to I mean, what we call the corporate governance and rules, it's very important, and all companies applying these rules, it's will make all things in transparency to the regulatory bodies from one side and to their boards from the other side.
So basically, governance,
yeah,
joint effort, transparency,
empowering. I mean, empowering. In addition to that, I mean, making the info and data available to the civil societies and
in
the
order
media
to be able
institutions
to collectively
to be
combat
like from,
corruption.
I mean, the audit side coming from the city itself.
Let me, first of all, congratulate
Thank you.
for your PhD.
Thank you.
We wish you all the best. Dr. Ibrahim Mostafa, Senior Economic Advisor, thank you very much for being with us here on the show. Thank you for joining us here on the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah, wishing you a very good night.